Vietnam wasn't supposed to be a global manufacturing powerhouse. In the 1980s, the economy was collapsing, inflation soared, and people queued for rice. Today, it's called the new factory of the world. But behind the headlines lies a complex truth. Is this rapid growth sustainable, or is Vietnam running on borrowed time? Chapter 1. From Collapse to Reform. In the 1980s, Vietnam's economy was collapsing. Inflation exceeded 700%, rice was rationed, and private trade was illegal. Farmers risked punishment by hiding crops under beds to survive. Per capita income hovered around $200. By 1986, policymakers recognized survival required change. Joy Moi, or renovation, decollectivized agriculture, allowed private business, and welcomed foreign investment. Farmers sold surplus for the first time, and rice exports soared. Poverty dropped from over 70% to under 6%, while GDP per capita increased exponentially. Industrial growth accelerated, integration into global markets deepened, and a young workforce emerged ready for modern factories. The reforms transformed Vietnam from desperation to opportunity, proving that targeted policy shifts can produce rapid economic recovery. The challenge now is sustaining growth while addressing emerging structural risks. Can Vietnam maintain its momentum in the face of rising global and domestic pressures? Chapter 2. Becoming the new factory of the world. Vietnam's rise as a manufacturing hub was not accidental. Low labor costs attracted foreign companies, but demographics, education, and political stability were equally important. Proximity to China made Vietnam an ideal China plus one alternative for global supply chains. Corporations including Apple, Foxconn, and Lego moved production to Vietnam, responding to trade tensions and rising costs in China. A young, literate, motivated workforce accelerated productivity. Special economic zones and government incentives further encouraged investment. Export-oriented growth in electronics, garments, and footwear expanded rapidly, generating jobs and revenue. However, reliance on foreign firms creates vulnerability. Economic stability is tied to corporate decisions abroad. Policymakers face the challenge of nurturing domestic firms and building high-value industries. Vietnam's comparative advantages remain strong, but sustaining growth requires balancing FDI reliance with domestic capability, ensuring that industrial expansion creates long-term economic resilience rather than dependence on global companies alone. Chapter 3. The Samsung Colony. Samsung's presence in northern Vietnam demonstrates opportunity and risk. Employing over 100,000 people in a single industrial cluster, it contributes around 13% of national GDP and up to 25% of exports. Benefits include jobs, tax revenue, and some technology transfer. However, concentration creates economic vulnerability. National prosperity fluctuates with Samsung's performance, making Vietnam susceptible to recalls, production slowdowns, or global market shifts. Local suppliers often handle low-margin tasks, limiting domestic value creation. Policymakers face the challenge of encouraging FDI while fostering local innovation. Over-reliance on a single corporation increases systemic risk and reduces domestic bargaining power. Sustainable growth requires diversification, both in industrial activity and corporate dependence. Vietnam must develop its own high-value industries and technological capabilities to move beyond assembly-focused production. Balancing foreign investment with domestic capacity is essential to ensure that economic success benefits the country broadly, rather than remaining heavily tied to one multinational's fortunes. Chapter 4. The $44 billion corruption black hole. Rapid growth exposed vulnerabilities in Vietnam's financial system. The Van Thinh Phat scandal, led by Truong My Lan, highlighted systemic weaknesses. Using Saigon Commercial Bank as a personal asset, she allegedly embezzled $44 billion, roughly 10% of GDP. Government intervention prevented collapse but revealed institutional fragility. Subsequent anti-corruption campaigns improved transparency and public trust, yet slowed approvals and bureaucracy. Officials delayed permits to avoid risk, stalling infrastructure and investment. This illustrates the trade-off between integrity and efficiency. Vietnam must maintain accountability without paralyzing governance. Strong institutions are critical for sustainable development. Cleaning up corruption must coincide with streamlined processes to ensure growth continues. Policymakers face the challenge of balancing enforcement with economic efficiency. Vietnam's experience demonstrates that effective oversight supports long-term stability, but overcorrection can hinder progress, making careful management of reforms essential for industrial and financial resilience. Chapter 5. The Foreign Investment Paradox. Foreign direct investment transformed Vietnam's factories and exports, yet created a paradox. Multinationals dominate profits and high-value segments, while local companies remain small, undercapitalized, and slow to innovate. Technology transfers happen gradually, and domestic suppliers often handle low-margin tasks. Vietnam gains employment, tax revenue, and industrial growth, but much value leaves the country. Policymakers now face pressure to nurture national champions through industrial policy, research funding, and education reform. Upgrading skills and deepening supply chains are essential. FDI is crucial for continued growth, but dependence carries long-term risks. Without strengthening domestic capabilities, Vietnam risks remaining an assembly hub rather than a creator of products and technologies. Converting foreign investment into local ownership and higher value production is the next challenge, critical to sustainable economic independence and long-term competitiveness. Chapter 6. Infrastructure strains behind the boom. Rapid growth exposed Vietnam's infrastructure weaknesses. Electricity demand has surged, yet grid capacity lags, causing rolling blackouts in northern industrial zones. Ports are congested, highways are outdated, and logistics costs account for nearly 20% of GDP, and metro and high-speed rail projects face delays due to bureaucracy and funding gaps. Factories may have advanced machinery, but outages disrupt production. Solar and wind energy expansion exists, yet transmission bottlenecks prevent reliable distribution. Without infrastructure upgrades, productivity gains are constrained. Investors notice, growth depends not only on cheap labor, but also on reliable power, transport, and logistics. Vietnam is investing heavily in ports, highways, and grids, but implementation struggles. The infrastructure paradox shows the country is building a Ferrari engine on a bicycle frame. The next decade will determine whether industrialization moves to productivity leadership or plateaus under physical constraints. Chapter 7. The demographic clock is ticking. Vietnam's young workforce has fueled its industrial rise, but demographic shifts threaten future growth. Fertility rates have dropped below replacement levels, and the population is aging. Automation is accelerating, reducing the advantage of cheap labor. The country faces a narrow window to transition from assembly-based growth to high productivity, technology-driven development. Education and skills training must evolve rapidly to prepare workers for advanced manufacturing and digital industries. Without timely reform, Vietnam risks the middle-income trap, where wages rise without corresponding productivity gains. Pension systems, healthcare, and labor policies must adapt to an older population. Policymakers must maximize the remaining demographic dividend through investments in education, vocational training, and innovation. Vietnam's next decade is critical. The demographic clock is ticking, and failure to upgrade skills, embrace automation responsibly, and encourage domestic technological capacity could stall economic momentum, leaving the country dependent on foreign investment without a sustainable, self-driven growth path. Chapter 8. Export reliance. Exports remain the backbone of Vietnam's economic growth. Garments, footwear, electronics, and smartphones dominate industrial output. Integration into global supply chains generates jobs, attracts investment, and accelerates industrialization. Yet dependence on foreign markets exposes vulnerabilities. Demand slowdowns in the US, Europe, or China directly affect production, revenue, and employment. Supply chain disruptions, including raw material shortages and shipping delays, magnify risks. Policymakers promote diversification of markets and products to reduce reliance on single-country demand. Initiatives support domestic suppliers, high-value manufacturing, and innovation. Export-driven growth demonstrates Vietnam's ability to convert comparative advantages into tangible results. Structural weaknesses remain. Long-term resilience requires not only maintaining export volume, but also developing domestic capacity, moving up the value chain, and retaining profits and skills within the country. Balancing rapid industrial expansion with resilience to external shocks is essential for long-term economic stability. Chapter 9. The Future Gamble. Vietnam's economic success is remarkable, but significant risks remain. Dependence on a few multinational corporations, infrastructure gaps, bureaucratic caution, and demographic pressures create vulnerabilities. Automation and technological change threaten low-skill industries. The country must convert assembly-focused growth into high-value domestic production. Investments in education, innovation, infrastructure, and domestic enterprises are essential. The next decade will determine whether Vietnam reaches high-income status or remains trapped in middle-income stagnation. Strategic industrial policy, technological adoption, and careful diplomacy are critical. Vietnam has shown resilience and adaptability, but the window for transformation is limited. Failure to act could stall progress and create dependency. Policymakers must navigate growth challenges strategically to ensure sustainable development. Vietnam's economic future depends on internal economic strength, homegrown industry, and structural reform. The decisions made now will determine whether it becomes a true industrial powerhouse or remains a regional assembly hub. So, Vietnam's story shows how strategy, investment, and reform shape real-world outcomes. But the future is still being written. What do you think Vietnam's next move should be to stay competitive? Comment on your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to follow more deep dives like this.